I'm not gonna lie guys, it's not been the best year. I've just had really bad luck with books this year. They're not... It hasn't been great. We are going to do the annual video of all the books that I read in the last year. I wouldn't be expecting great things. There are a few good ones in here. I'm gonna try not to be too negative. I just feel like I haven't picked great books this year, and then that's put me into a reading slump. I did not hit my reading goal last year. I didn't even meet the amount that I read last year. I had a goal of 25. I read 18. Mainly because I was just sick of the books that I was reading, but we're gonna go through them and I'm gonna tell you why. I'm gonna use my Storygraph to remind me. I use Storygraph to review them all. And let's get going. Typically, I tend to read thrillers. I call them dramas because I don't know what else to call them. But things like, I don't know, Taylor Jenkins Reid and stuff like that, like dramas that don't focus completely on romances. Like I wouldn't call them a romance. And I do add some fantasy in there. Mix it up. Right, I've got my pile. You can see it. I am gonna go, oh, is it falling? I am gonna go in chronological order and I might not remember everything about the books, but I'm gonna try. So, first one that I've read is L.J. Ross, Holy Island. If you're from the Northeast, you'll have seen these. Not in this format because this is ugly. The books are very, very pretty books. Like, they're beautiful. I wish I enjoyed this so I could buy the pretty books, but I did not. This is the first in a detective series. It's all set in the Northeast. They're all dotted about. There's ones, like, I can't even describe it. They're just all in the Northeast, and Holy Island is the first one and it's set on Holy Island. So I rated this a 3-star. I really liked the premise of this. I liked what it was trying to go for. It was a little bit spooky. It was a little bit creepy. It is a detective one, which I don't really read detective books. I don't particularly like them, but I wanted to give it a go because it was the Northeast. And like I say, they're everywhere. If you go into Waterstones in the Northeast, there's probably an L.J. Ross section. I like the premise. I like what it was going for. I just don't think it was well executed. I feel like there was loads of random sexism thrown in here. It was really strange. I'd be reading and then there is the male lead, which is the detective, and then there is a love interest in it. And there was just random sexist bits thrown in about her and I was like, that wasn't necessary in the slightest. Like the way he talks to his police buddies about her, it's like, why is that needed? I also didn't, I'm reading my review that I wrote, I also didn't like the ending of this book. It was good, but I didn't like the ending of it. I don't know, I kind of saw a bit that it was going into. I wasn't a fan of the ending. Second book was Skin of the Sea by Natasha Bowen. I rated this a 3.25. First up, beautiful book, isn't it? Look at that. Stunning. This is a fantasy based on the time when people were being forced away from Africa into being slaves. And this is a fantasy story of the gods of Africa and one of the... She's not a god, but she works for one of the gods, trying to deal with that. I really enjoyed reading this culture. It was really interesting reading about some of the African gods from one of the cultures. And I loved reading a book where all of the characters were black, but I just felt like this story was a little bit slow at times. I got a little bit bored of the story at some points. And that was my main thing. Thrillers are my genre for a reason. I like fast-paced books and this just felt very, very slow. But I enjoyed reading about the culture. I enjoyed reading about the characters. I can't do slow-paced books. But if you can, I would recommend this. It's a really good book. Third, How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackie. I expected great things from this, I'm not gonna lie. This was viral, this was everywhere. Everyone was reading this. It was in every Waterstones. And I was a little bit disappointed. I think it's probably because I am a thriller reader, so I expected it to be like an excellent thriller, whereas I feel like this was a book that a lot of people who don't read thrillers read, so they found it good because they've never read a thriller before, if that makes sense. So I rated this a 3-star. I found the concept really interesting. I really liked the story, but it just didn't keep me interested enough, and I did guess the twist, but I found it hard to read. Like when it felt like a chore to read this. It was just a bit, I found it also a bit hard to follow with the time jumps. I feel like it could have been done better. And it's just not my type of humor. Like the humor that was in here, I didn't find this a funny book, whereas I feel like a lot of people did. For me, this was just a thriller that was just a bit, I don't know, I was uninterested at points. I also, again, I'm not gonna say the spoiler in case you wanna read this, but I also did not like the ending. I did, but I didn't like how they missed a certain perspective out of the ending, so not for me. Right, next up is The School for Good Mothers by Jessamine Chan. I found this one so hard to rate. I have rated it a 3.75, but looking back, I think I'd rate it a 4. I found this a really interesting read, and I feel like this equates to The Handmaid's Tale. It's that kind of a book. So it's pretty self-explanatory. It's about a school for good mothers. So it's a kind of social commentary on our reality, but a step further, like Handmaid's Tale. And it's this lady it follows, I can't remember her name, Frida, and basically social services gets called on her because she's left her baby alone, and she's forced to go to this school for good mothers where you're not allowed to talk to your child and you're taught how to be a good mother. I would say it's set in a right-wing society, so the way that it's being taught to be a good mother is a bit... I disagree. And I feel like it's very much a social commentary book, and I feel like they're really hard to rate because it's got good points. Like, it's a good point. It makes a good point. But as a book, I don't know, I found it a bit hard to read sometimes, but looking back, I like this book and I would recommend it, and I feel like it's a good book to read. It was a bit slow for me at times. It felt like some of the parts were there to be a social commentary rather to keep you entertained, which is completely fair enough, but again, like I've said, I don't do slow very well. It's an uncomfortable read, but like I say, it's a social commentary. It's probably meant to be an uncomfortable read, but it's really uncomfortable. I also didn't like the end of this one. Seems to be a theme for them, but when I think back, I don't like the end, but it was kind of like, yeah, okay, I can see why it ended that way. So overall, I would say I would recommend this, but only if you're in the mood for like a social commentary book. It feels like a concept that should be completely like, no, this will never happen, but I don't know, the way the world's going. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely read this, but if you're more of a novel, not commenting on the world kind of thing, I would maybe give it a skip. Next up is The Mad Woman's Ball by Victoria Mass. I was excited to read this. Obviously I feel like this felt more like a classic book. It's quite old. I can't remember how old it is actually. It felt more like a classic. There is a movie on Prime adaptation, and I was excited for this because it was quick. I read this book in 2 days, I think. This is the quickest read that I did throughout the entire year, and it's beautiful. Like, look at that cover. Stunning. But I was a bit disappointed. I was really excited about the concept. So the concept is basically there is an asylum in Paris, and every year this asylum throws a mad woman's ball. Obviously, it's not a good name, but still. And it follows a nurse who kind of comes to an understanding about what this asylum is. And that's all I feel like I can say without giving it away. But basically, I really enjoyed the concept, and like I say, I was really excited for the concept, but it just felt like the entire book was world building and nothing happened. Like, it felt like it was building and building and building and building, and then it ended. Something does happen, something does happen and it does change, but it just felt like it was all world building. Obviously it's a small book, so they can only do so much, but it felt like it could have been so good and then it stopped. So I was a bit disappointed. I really enjoyed the world though, and I really enjoyed the characters. It just felt like it was set up for something bigger than what actually happened. And I feel like if you read the book, you could be like, yeah, but that's the point. But no, I feel like they could have made a bigger point with it. It's a very feminist story. It's feminist literature. But I did enjoy reading it. It's just, it wasn't the greatest, but I enjoyed reading it. On a side note, I watched the Prime movie. It is in French, but I think I watched it in dubbed, and I would say they completely missed the point of the book. Like, completely missed the point of it. So don't watch it. Next is my first Harlan Coben book. I have watched some Harlan Coben. I haven't watched the new one on Netflix, but I've watched a few. I can't remember which I've watched, but this is my first book that I read. I didn't realise this is the second in this series of the Harlan Coben one. The first one, I can't remember what it's called. I can't remember what the first one's called, but it was readable without reading the first one, but it just felt like I was like, okay, I wish I'd read the first one to get that story. But it definitely was readable without reading it. The concept of this is about a guy called Wilde, and he's fine. This one is so hard to describe, so I am going to read the blurb because I'm not going to do it justice. So he is known as Wilde, the boy from the woods. And in the first one, that's the story. In this one, we're just following him on. He has grown up knowing nothing of his parents and even less about his own identity until now, when a match on a DNA database puts him on the trail of a close relative, the only family member he has ever known. Wilde thinks he might be about to solve the mystery of who he really is. Only this relation disappears as quickly as he's resurfaced. Undaunted, Wilde continues his research, becoming caught up in a secret community committed to exposing anonymous online trolls. Then one by one, people start to die, and it soon becomes clear that a serial killer is targeting the secret community, and that the next victim could be Wilde himself. It's so freaking complicated, like it's such a big web and it all interconnects. It's good. I rated it a 4.5. I did enjoy reading this book. The only reason I didn't rate it 5 stars is I found it really difficult to follow at times. I had to reread bits to understand what was going on. And that's not related to me not reading the first book. It had nothing to do with it. It's just, it was hard to follow because of this big web. I didn't guess the twist, which is new for me. It's too complicated to guess the twist, I think. I am autistic, so I do pattern recognition very well, and I normally guess twists. And I didn't, which is great. I feel like Harlan Coben, from the stuff that I've watched and now read this, is so random that if you guess twists quite well, it's so random you'll not get it. I enjoyed the fast pace and it feels very relevant to now. I think this is a 2022 book. It's got stuff about influencers and things in there and troll communities, so it feels really very relevant to now. There is something spoilery that I found disappointing, but I'm not gonna say it. I don't want to ruin the book for you, but I put all of my reviews on Storygraph, so if you want to see it, I'll link it below. Next up is Mexican Gothic. I have already talked about this in a video that I did in Vlogmas where I talked about my favourite reads of 2023. This I actually rated lower than Harlan Coben, but when I was thinking about my enjoyable reads of the year, Harlan Coben didn't come up, but this did. I rated this 3.75. I enjoyed reading it though. I loved the premise. I just found some parts so difficult to follow. Like it was so difficult to follow. I have mentioned I'm autistic. I am an autistic person who doesn't really have an imagination. That isn't the case for all autistic people, it's just the case for me. But because I don't have that imagination, I found some parts so hard to understand and to know what was happening. I feel like I would really love to see a movie of this so I can understand those points better. I do feel like this one as well is such a tale of halves. The first half is so freaking slow. Second half was fast paced. First half I found really, really difficult to read. Second half, loved it. I loved the premise. I really liked it. I feel like I can't rate it higher than what I did because I didn't understand some parts of it. But I do feel like if you're going to read this, read it quickly. Like read it not all in one setting, because I mean it is a short book, some people could do that, but read it quickly. I feel like it's a much better experience that way rather than reading it slowly, because that first half, I nearly DNF'd it. Next up is Do No Harm by Jack Jordan. I read this one super quick as well. I enjoyed this one. I rated this 4.5. This is a thriller. It's about a surgeon who basically is blackmailed into doing something with one of their patients, and about the fallout of that and why they had to do that. It's a really good book. It's not like the best thriller I've ever read, but it did keep me enticed. It's not like super complicated either. It's very, very twisty turny. It's very fast paced, which is great. Loved that. And I really enjoyed the plot. And I did like the ending of this one. The thing that I didn't like about this, and I kind of want to rate it lower because of it, is one, there was kind of a lack of descriptors of the people. I have no idea what the people in this book look like. There was no description, which some people are gonna like. I didn't. I don't know what they look like. I don't know what their skin color was. Like, I don't know much about the people in this book apart from what happened. Also, some of the descriptors, this is very specific and very niche, and I know some people probably aren't going to agree, but some of the descriptors on this book for the main character were deemed as a really bad thing when they're actually just autism markers. And that again, very specific because obviously I am autistic, but she was like described as somebody who really, like, I wrote this down, so hang on. So I said, some descriptors for the main character were made out to be a sign of being a bad person, and even saying stuff like she doesn't have any friends, which were autism markers. As an autistic person, I didn't really like it. So it was described as like, oh, she's a bitch. She mustn't not have any friends. When it's like, she could just be autistic and really like her job though, because obviously she's a surgeon and she's described as being this person who's like really involved in her job, and she's really like blunt, not rude, but just blunt. And then the detective in this is like, because she's blunt, she mustn't have any friends and she's not a nice person. It's like, okay. Not a deal breaker, but as an autistic person, it was kind of a bit of a hard read. My next one, I can't find the book. Me and Jack have been looking. Obviously, I am colour coordinated, so it does make it hard to find. But I have no idea where this book has gone, so I'm going to pop it up on screen instead. And that is Book of Night by Holly Black. This was a hard read. Like, it was a hard read. It's one of those ones where you read the concept, like you're reading it and you're like, what? And I feel like it was such a complicated concept, it could have been done well, but it was just like not done well at all. So it's kind of set up in a world of magicians. Let me Google the blurb. Let me read the blurb because I'm not going to be able to describe it well. It was so random. Charlie Hall has never found a lock she couldn't pick, a book she couldn't steal, a bad decision she wouldn't make. She spent half her life working for glow-mists, magicians who manipulate shadows to peer into locked rooms, strangle people in their beds, or worse. Glow-mists guard their secrets greedily, creating an underground economy of grimoires, and to rob their fellow magicians, they need Charlie. Now she's trying to distance herself from past mistakes, but going straight isn't easy. Bartending at a dive, she's still entirely too close to the corrupt underbellies of the Berkshires, not to mention that her sister Posey is desperate for magic, and that her shadowless and possibly soulless boyfriend has been keeping secrets from her. When a terrible figure from her past returns, Charlie descends back into a maelstrom of murder and lies. Determined to survive, she's up against a cast of doppelgangers, mercurial billionaires, glow-mists, and the people she loves best in the world, all trying to steal a secret that will allow them control of the shadow world and more. It was just so complicated. Like, it was way too hard to keep track of who everyone was, things that were going on. The world building for how complicated it wasn't there. Like, I'm still not 100% sure what glow-mists are. And because of it being difficult to know what things were, it made it just really difficult to read. It was a good concept, but it was just done badly, and because of this it felt like the whole thing was setting you up for the next book, but not well. Like, I'm not going to read the rest of that series because I have no idea what happened. It also felt like nothing really happened until the end. It was so slow. Like, this was probably my most difficult read maybe of the entire year, and the end did not happen. Like, I was not happy with it. It kind of felt like, what was the entire point of this book if that's how it was going to end? I'm really sorry, I just really didn't like this book. It was not for me. Next up, we're coming up with some of my favourites though, and that is The Wrath and the Dawn by Renée. Ahdieh. Really enjoyed this book. This is very much a romance book. Like, this is a romance book, and I wasn't expecting great things from it. I picked it up because I liked the look of it in Waterstones, but I did. I really enjoyed it. We do have the second book of this series coming up in the pile as well, but I really like this. It was one of my favourites of the year. I rated it a 4. The reason it didn't get a 5 was it felt like it was building, like, you can tell it was a series book, which I don't really like. I feel like books should be able to stand alone on themselves and still be an enjoyable read, but it felt like a part of a series, and the twist felt a bit prolonged. Like, it felt like it was kind of like, get to the point with what's happening. Like, it felt like they dragged it a little bit. That's the only reason it wasn't a 5-star. And also, like, I really enjoyed it, but it was still a romance book. Like, I wouldn't say it was my favourite book. I mentioned this one in the other video. I also really loved reading a book from this culture. I found it really interesting. Right, next up, my favourite book of the year, Cersei. This is my only 5-star read of this year. I love this book. I really like, I was saying this in the other videos, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but this book feels like it should have been about this big, and it wasn't. It was this big. I feel like there was so much content in this. It was fast paced. If you have read Song of Achilles and you didn't enjoy it, same. I really did not enjoy Song of Achilles. I was very reluctant to read anything else by Madeline Miller, but I loved this one. I love this book. I would highly recommend. I don't want to say too much about it because I think you should go into this book not knowing what's going to happen, but this is my favourite book of the year. Only 5-star read. Would recommend. House of the Golden Door by Elodie Harper was my next one. This is the second in a series. The first one is, where is it? The first one is The Wolf Den. Apparently I can't see it. I really enjoyed the first one. I was really excited to read the second one. I can't decide which one I prefer the most. Probably the first one. So this is, I'm trying to think how I can describe it to you without spoiling it if you haven't read the first one. The basic premise is, the main character is a prostitute, a forced prostitute I might add, like prostitute slave in Pompeii. It follows her, and the second one is following on her life after the first book. That's all I can say without spoiling it. I like the pacing on this. This is more like a drama. It does have, I wouldn't say it has much romance in it actually, the first one more so, but I'm not going to spoil it. I would recommend it. I rate it a 4.5. This is so funny. All of my recommended books, like my top 5 books of this year, have all been in the same period. So next one is Notes of Execution by Danya Kukafka. So this one I did talk about in the top 5 reads. video, so I'll just talk about it briefly. This is a story following the women in a serial killer's life, and I feel like it's a bit of a, not a social commentary, but it is a book responding to the love of serial killers currently, like true crime. It's not hugely that. It is mainly a story, but I said it in the other video, but I have the version that has the essay from the author in the back, and I highly recommend reading that and the essay. I rated this a 4.5, and the reason that I didn't give it a 5 was sometimes it just felt a little bit hard to read. Like, it felt like the writing was a bit too metaphorical for me, but still would highly recommend. Next is a very popular one, and I read The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I found this very hard to read. I didn't expect it. It sounds so silly, but I didn't expect this book to be so war-y. Like, I thought it was going to be a fantasy with war, but this is a war book that is a little bit fantasy. I hope you get what I mean. I found it very difficult to follow. This isn't a casual read. Like, you have to be on it with the details to understand what's going on. Sometimes it felt like the important points in terms of powers or people were just thrown in randomly, and you were expected to really clock onto it and remember that, and I just couldn't. Like, I didn't, and so sometimes I was like, who is this? What's happening? How is this power happening? What's going on? So I didn't love this book. I think I rated it 3.75. I enjoyed the premise. It was really difficult to read, and also some points were just so difficult to read because of the violence. Like, I'm not a prude person or squeamish person, but one part of it I had to skip over because I was like, this is too much. Like, I can't read this. So check the content warnings and only read it if you're into very, very complicated books about war. Another popular one, We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. Lovely short book, really, really nice. I got through this quite quick. I gave it a 4.5. I really did enjoy this one. I kind of forgot about this book. I didn't guess the twist, which is great for me, as we've established. It made me want to go back and reread the entire book because of the twist. I actually, as well, got a little bit emotional at the end, which is quite rare for me. I felt like the writing really portrayed the emotion and the mood of the book quite well. So it was really nice writing. I did enjoy it. The only reason I didn't score it a 5 was because some parts were just a bit too difficult for me to understand with my autism. I took them too literally and then got really confused about what was going on. So just some parts were a little bit difficult, but I did really enjoy this, and it was lovely and short. We have 3 more. This one is The Rose and the Dagger, so this is the second book to The Wraith and the Dawn. Enjoyed it. It was a good follow-on. I didn't enjoy it as much as the first one. I scored this one a 3.5. It was just a bit slow for me in parts. It felt like we were going to learn more about certain things in it, like the fantasy elements. It felt like we were going to learn more about that and then didn't. I really like the concept. I love the characters, but I was looking at the reviews after I read it, and I agree with them in that it just didn't feel the same as the first one. It felt like a different book. But I did enjoy it. It's just not as much as the first one. Right, penultimate one. And I've talked about this book so much on this channel, so I'm not going to talk about it for too long. It's The Luminaries by Susan Dennard. It's the pretty book that I've talked about loads. I'd probably say this is my second favourite book of the year. I scored it a 4.25, which is funny, isn't it? Because I've scored some 4.5s, but I enjoyed this more. I really love the world. I love the characters. I love the premise. I love the diversity. This book is so diverse. Incredible. And also, it's just bloody beautiful. It felt like we weren't being told the whole story though in preparation for the next book. Like, this feels like part of a series, and I don't mind it because I really enjoy the world, but it feels like it's part of a series. It was kind of like a little bit like, oh, here's what's coming, but I'm not going to tell you about that yet. So it wasn't that isn't my favorite. It's also not my favorite trope that's in here. I could get past it because, like I say, I enjoyed the premise so much, but it's not my favorite trope, and it felt a little repetitive in parts. Like, it felt like the same things were being said all over again. I also feel like I might have guessed a twist that's coming up in the next ones, but I don't mind it that much. I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4.25. Right, we are ending on probably one of my least favorite books of the year, and that is The Gone and Forgotten by Clare Whitfield. This was so slow. Like, this was so slow. I was bored. It felt like nothing happened until the last 30 pages, and it was slow to a point where it was doing itself a disservice. Like I was like, tell me what is happening, because I'm so bored that nothing is going on. There was too much mystery in this. There was too much mystery. It was incredibly dark, like incredibly dark, and it just felt very chaotic. Once things started happening, it was too chaotic. It was too much. I was really disappointed because I really liked the premise. The premise, I feel like the blurb doesn't really tell you what actually happens in this book as well, so I'm not going to read the blurb. It's basically, there's a girl who's living in London and her mum is institutionalized, and then she has to go live with her aunt who lives in a really remote island in the Scottish Isles, and she goes there to talk to her aunt to find out about her dad. She doesn't know who her dad was, and to find out about the mystery of this. And then when she goes there, her aunt is living in a family home of her husband's in this really like barren old mansion, and there's like mystery around the mansion. There's also like rumors going around about her like uncle-in-law killing someone. There's loads of different, and the house is really spooky, and then his mom's really like creepy, and she is obsessed with plants. There was loads of bits in this that I was like, ooh, this is good. But it was so boring. And then this is a spoiler, but I feel like it's needed for a content warning. There is a sexual assault, a full-blown sexual assault at the end of this book that was so unnecessary, that it was so uncomfortable. It happens and you're like, okay, that's gonna be relevant to the story, and then it's not mentioned again. It's mentioned, but just in a way of like, when she looks at him, she's like, oh, this happened, but then it had no bearing on the story, it had no bearing on the twist, and then it's not dealt with at all. Like, obviously the end of the book, there's a resolution. There's not a resolution, but it's a book. There's always like a resolution at the end. And she doesn't go get seen to, she doesn't, like, nothing gets solved, and it had nothing to do with the story. And it was like, it felt like she'd put that in just to make the book a bit more edgy. And it was like, I didn't need to read that assault for no reason. And I just don't understand why it was in there. It was so inappropriate. And there was also this theme of sex running through it that had nothing to do with the storyline as well. It felt like, again, it was being written just to feel a bit more edgy, and it's not appropriate. Like, she was like, I think she's 16, the main character, and it's just talked about how she's a virgin loads, and it's like, this has nothing to do with the story. So, did not enjoy. The twist was, yeah, it was alright, but like, there's so much in there that wasn't need to be in there. It was so dark for no reason. So yeah, I finished the year off with not a great book. And that is it. That's all the books I read for this year. I am in the middle of reading the Family Upstairs sequel. I thought I was going to finish that by the end of this year, but then I think I started that in November, and then Vlogmas hit, so I just had no time to read at all. Hopefully, this year is going to be better. If everyone can recommend some really good books to me, that would be great. This is my TBR, so I do have some good stuff to come up. But if anybody has any recommendations for like really, really good thrillers or really, really good fantasies, please tell me, because I need good books this year. If you did enjoy it, please make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, share, all the good stuff. But even if you don't do any of that, thank you so much for making it till the end. But I shall hopefully see you in another video.